The reason I'm covering conflict intensity with higher education examples is because oftentimes we respond to what appear to be small things as if it's more of a big conflict. So when someone doesn't include us in a meeting that we thought we should be included in, we may perceive that as a high intensity, very hostile act, when actually it may be more lower on the scale, and someone may have miscommunicated, forgot to include you in the meeting, not intentionally left you out. Because when we're in conflict, we often create a belief around the conflict and attribute the behavior of leaving us out with a larger dislike of ourselves or some sort of conflict that is much deeper. Sometimes being left out of a meeting is a deeper thing. It's a pattern over time of conflict. Those can often be bigger. What I'm trying to do is help you discern some of the difference, like how intense is this? We still, in very low intensity and very high intensity conflicts, we go into fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, and we'll need to calm. But it's important to recognize what's really big and is going to take a lot more effort, and what is maybe contained, or what is misunderstood, where you think it's low but it's actually higher, or you think it's high but it's actually lower. And that's how you ask clarification questions to find out. So in this case, a high intensity one would be like a department-wide feud over equity practices or governance of the department or the program. Oftentimes this can feel like it's true in faculty senate across campus, or if you're on the graduate assistant governance body, then you may experience this too. But it's a hostile environment. That is where there is a lot of negative, biased kinds of things happening that are high-level conflict. Then you have moderate high, where there's frequent disruption, frequent arguments, such as public disagreements between staff and a supervisor when others are around, so they're not restraining it behind closed doors or talking to people in calm voices. It's frequent, and it seems to be an existing pattern. Then we have moderate, which is where, in general, passive-aggressive behavior kicks in, which is the silent treatment or not giving someone the information they need to make decisions, or during a meeting you go silent even though you have information that would help. Passive-aggressive. Now, likely all of us have seen it or experienced it or done it ourselves in some way. It's less overt, but it's still a form of conflict in the workplace. And then lower is miscommunication, like someone sent you an email that's brief, and you take that as harsh or critical, when actually they were in a rush and they just tried to get it out, and they didn't add much context in their writing. So those are important to check out, to say, yeah, I kind of received it with this tone. Is that the tone you intended? Again, it comes back to communication between people. And then finally, the minimal or minor disagreement could be a brief disagreement on strategy in a team meeting, or forgot to bring the refreshments for people. It's your turn, so you have to go get them later. Those kind of things can be more the minor things. And remember, minor may be part of a larger pattern, but in general, we have this intensity scale, and it's good to just sense where it is on the intensity scale. Am I dealing with a high-level repeated threat, or am I dealing with a low-level one-time threat? It helps you sort out how to respond and what to do. So now I want to get to another part, which is very exciting, which is your conflict style. And conflict styles come from the research of Thomas and Kilman, both professors, and they came up with this model. Now, there are a variety of different models for styles of conflict, those kind of things. But this is one of the easiest ones to apply and to understand. So it's used very frequently around the world to help people understand differences in conflict styles. So basically, We have assertiveness from low to high on one side, and then cooperativeness from low to high on the bottom. And so as you go up the assertive scale, it means your style is more and more assertive, taking more and more initiative to solve things. Cooperativeness means as it goes up to the right, it means you're more and more likely to work with others, to come up with common solutions, to work together. And then in the middle is compromising, which is kind of middle of assertiveness and middle cooperativeness. But these are 5 styles. So we've got avoiding style, accommodating style, compromising style, collaborating style, and competing style, each with different proportions of assertiveness and cooperativeness. So the first one is avoiding, which is in general step back to stay safe, to protect yourself. And oftentimes it's when you remove yourself from a situation, or when a situation is going on in front of you, you go to your own world within your head instead of engage in the world where the conflict is happening. You often see this with kids in families where there's high levels of conflict. And in general, avoiding is unassertive and uncooperative, meaning that you're not asserting it, you're avoiding it. And uncooperative, meaning you're separating yourselves from the others involved in the conflict. And you may avoid temporarily, or you may avoid long term. There are times to use avoidance on purpose in order to protect yourself. And then there are other times where we recognize we're avoiding, but we re-engage later. Or sometimes we always avoid, and that may not be the most effective way to approach a conflict. So in general, use it when the stakes are low, but the situation could be risky. And that means that you're not, there's not the end of the world, that or something that's being discussed, or the conflict is not going to be a significant impact. But the risk of engaging could be an emotional risk, or a physical risk, or a different kind of risk could happen. So you want to avoid getting into the conflict. And sometimes it's because we're afraid, and because it triggers a past experience we've had, or reminds us of something that's no longer true, but it was then, so it brings it into the present, and we react, especially when we have traumatic events in our life. The other thing to watch out for is if you use the avoiding style too often or too long, it can result in unresolved issues or missed opportunities if we overuse it. So each of the styles, I'm going to do the same thing, which is what is it, then when to use it, and what to watch out for if you overuse it. One key thing is none of us are only one style. We have tendencies towards one or another in general, but we can use any of the 5 styles. And each of the 5 styles is the right one to use in different situations. And sometimes you don't know that until you do it. But it's important to just be aware, not only of your style, but of the style of others. And when you start to understand it, rather than judge it, think, what are the person's underlying goals, values, beliefs, things that are driving them, their purpose, that may be behind using that style. And it can often be a learned style that has helped them many times, and so they repeat it. Sometimes it's a style that no longer serves them, but they're so used to it, they keep doing it. And that's when it requires a team to help everybody work through it. Okay, so that's avoiding. Now the second one is accommodating. Now the accommodating style is go along to get along, is kind of the gist. Go along to get along. So it's unassertive, but it is cooperative. You're willing to take into account someone else's perspective and engage with that. But you're willing to deprioritize your own concerns to satisfy the concerns of the other person. And you use it when you're preserving harmony. Now, preserving harmony is where the harmony of your relationship with the other person or the group is more important than the conflict itself and your own issues. So you're willing to put that away and instead do more of what the other person needs. And that's important to recognize, that you may have that way of interacting. That's important to be self-aware that that's happening. So what might accommodating look like? So I want you to think, is preserving harmony more important? And I have to be careful not to overuse it, because that could lead to resentment and feeling undervalued if you're the one always accommodating others or the other. At the same point, if you're the one that's never accommodating, then people may start to resent you because you're always wanting more of what you want and are not as aware of what others may want. So it's important to keep that in balance. Now, examples of accommodating might be, say, a situation where you're with a coworker and the coworker has to skip work or a shift or coming to a class or running a class due to a personal circumstance. And then they ask you, the accommodator, to cover their shift. As an accommodator, you also have your own important commitments during that same time period. So the challenge is they want you to cover something for them because they have a personal commitment that came up. But you also have a personal commitment. As an accommodator, you're more likely to agree to cover the coworker's shift despite the personal consequences to you, your friends or family, or the commitment that you have. And you might, if you keep doing that all the time, that can cause an erosion of your kind of satisfaction with your life, with other people and relationships. So it's important to keep in mind. Each of these styles has a fit, and not to berate yourself, but to notice and to allow yourself to change over time. But that would be an accommodator response. So you agree to cover it, even though it's really, in a sense, harmful for you or less inconvenient for you too. But there's a time to do that anyway, and then there's a time to preserve your own boundaries. A second example might be a supervisor that you have unexpectedly moves a project completion date up a week and says you need to get it done by this new timeline. And you're, as an accommodator, you're like, of course, I'll sacrifice everything to make it happen earlier. Now, if you weren't an accommodator, if you were more a compromiser, which is more assertive, you might say, well, yeah, I could do whatever it takes, but I think to preserve my own health and my own well-being, as well as help the supervisor get the project done, I'm going to negotiate a more favorable or reasonable deadline. How about 5 days instead of 7? How about giving me, instead of moving up a week, move it up 5 days, and I can reach that, or 4 days, and I can reach that, and negotiate. And as your supervisor, they may be able to tell you, well, no, you have to do it the way I want, which is part of the role. But at the same time, an accommodator wouldn't say anything, but someone who is more assertive would. So you have to decide, is this the time to accommodate or a time to be more assertive? Now, compromising is the next one, which is one so many of us are familiar with. Let's meet in the middle. So you're moderately assertive and cooperative, seeking a quick, mutually acceptable solution that partially satisfies both parties. And you often see compromise in politics. So a long time ago, my dad worked with Henry Kissinger, and they were at the table negotiating with one of the other countries around nuclear weapons. And the United States came in with a very kind of strong position about nuclear weapons in Europe. And the other side countered, and they went back and forth and back and forth. And finally, my dad said within like 2 hours, they'd come up with a new agreement that didn't give the U.S. what they initially wanted and didn't give the other country what they wanted, but they found a middle ground and they were able to work it out. And he said he was so impressed because, he came in thinking, we've got to keep the line on this. But Henry Kissinger knew a lot more about the situation than he did and was able to change the terms and able to allow them to come with an agreement during that sit down rather than delaying again, going for more conflict and then coming back and trying again. So compromising requires you to kind of know what the situation is, know both sides, and be willing to use it when time's limited. Both sides have relatively equal power or influence, and you're trying to make a decision that at least everyone gets something. Now, you want to watch out and use it when using it, because it may not address the true root of the conflict and can lead to less than ideal outcomes for both parties. So it's one of the sacrifices you may have to make. Over time, you may make several compromises, but that end up getting you closer to your original position that you wanted to accomplish. The bottom line is, though, using compromise gives enough assertiveness to get some of what you want and enough compromise, enough cooperativeness to let the other person have some benefit as well. So compromising is when you both agree to let each other get to your own goals, as opposed to collaborating, which is where you get to a shared goal. So compromising is each of you get to your own goal. You help each other get there. Collaborating is when you get to a shared goal. But first, let's talk about some examples of compromising. So, for example, a situation, a department chair and a dean disagree on hiring a new faculty member because of budget constraints at the university. So compromise would look like the dean agrees to fund a part-time lecturer instead of a full-time tenure-track faculty member, while the department chair compromises by agreeing to delay the search for the full-time position until the next year, based on the budget forecast. So that would be an example of a compromise where one said no and the other one said, I need this position, and the dean said, no, you can't have it. They came together and they worked it out so they each got part of what they needed. The dean saved some funding for this fiscal year to manage his other issues, and the department chair was able to get at least a part-time lecturer to cover a couple of the classes that they needed to. So that's an example of a compromise. Neither one got the full thing they wanted, but they both got something. They can do it quicker, and it helps maintain relationships during conflict. Another example that probably many of you are familiar with is a graduate student requests an extension on a thesis deadline. I've experienced this a lot. But the faculty member has grading and graduation deadlines. So if the faculty member gives too much time, the graduate student gets it, but they can't get the result into the system in time to count towards the semester. So a compromise example is the faculty member may grant a shorter extension, not as long as the student initially wanted. And the student agrees to finish that partial draft by the original deadline to show progress. So I'm making progress. You've given me an extension. I will make the extension, but I want to show I've made progress by getting it in according to the original timeline. So it's a compromise. The faculty member will still get it in time for grades, but not as much time to handle it. And the student gets a little bit more time, than not as much as they wanted, but more time to finish their thesis. That's an example of compromising. Now the next one is collaborating. Now on the surface, collaborating sounds like the best, but really it's not. It just depends on how well it fits the situation. So collaborating is known as win-win, where, and in the win-win, you're assertive and cooperative. You're working together to find a mutually beneficial solution for both of you, versus each of you getting your own goals, which is more compromise. You're finding a shared goal that you can get. And you use it when the concerns of both parties are too significant to be compromised, where you really need the full package. The challenge is when you're working on collaboration, it can be very time consuming. It can take a long time. So it requires dedication and patience. Remember again, if you look at what are the underlying factors, the purpose, the goals, the values of the people in the negotiation, in the collaboration, and you try to help both sides get that deeper resolution, then collaborations can often create lasting, great solutions to conflict. On the individual level, collaboration can really help you say, I'm going to go into this conversation about the conflict with the idea, how can we both be satisfied by this? Not, I'm going to beat you, I'm going to win, but I'm going to see what you need and understand your motives, and you're going to understand mine, and we're going to find a solution together. In groups, we're often more creative than we are individually. So what's an example of this? Well, let's say the situation is a student shares concerns about unequal group work in a lab. So they're in groups in a lab, and you as the lab GA are wanting to help all the groups do the right thing, do the work together, and collaborate on the group work so that they produce a shared outcome. And if you've ever worked in a student group on an academic project, sometimes it's amazing how well everyone gets on. They share the responsibility. And other times it's the most frustrating thing ever because people check out, someone does twice the work and it doesn't come out well, or someone carries the load and everyone gets the same grade. So it can be very challenging. So a collaborating style in response to the situation, which again is student shares concerns about unequal group work in a lab. They're frustrated, but they don't want to cause tension by pointing it out to the peers, to the others in their lab group. So a graduate teaching assistant in a lab, if they had a collaborating style, might do it this way. They might meet with the student to make sure they understand the issue, ask for specific examples of how the group work is unequal. Then the GTA facilitates a group meeting with all the students involved in the group to collaboratively agree. What are they going to agree on clear expectations and a plan that looks at the responsibilities and, as best they can, divides them more equally. And that plan may include rotating responsibilities, like the first month, one takes on one part of the group work and one part takes on another, and then the next month you rotate. But it's looking for that collaboration, that way of finding a resolution to the conflict that engages everyone and benefits everyone. And during that process, it's important for the graduate teaching assistant to get input from all members and not just have one or two vocal members dominate, but get collaboration from all of them. That's where collaboration happens. It doesn't happen when a few people make the decision and no one else talks, which happens a lot, but is not collaboration. So that's the collaborating style. So we've been through different styles. We've been through the avoiding style, the accommodating style, the compromising style, the collaborating style. And the final one is competing. Now, because it's final doesn't mean it's best. Typically, the most effective in general is collaborating in most situations, but that's not always possible. So you have to read the situation. Now, competing is has different dynamics. Competing is the win at all costs. Now, I'm exaggerating this to make the point that competing is me versus you instead of me and you. And it's very assertive, but uncooperative. So competing is assertive, like you're trying to win or be better or get the resources. But it's uncooperative. In other words, you're not really interested in others people's goals or finding a shared goal. You're just interested in getting your own way. So when do you need to use it? Well, when quick decisions are vital, maybe in an emergency or when enforcing rules. For example, when we are, I used to run residence halls in Boulder, and when we would have an emergency in the halls, it wouldn't be, well, let's talk about how to manage the emergency. Let's all get together. It was directive. We were telling people what to do. We were competing because the win means protecting everyone who's involved and getting things done rapidly without much discussion because we don't have time. Now, you need to watch out for competing because over the long haul, it can really damage relationships and it can escalate conflict if it's overused. When you're always competing to win, actually people start avoiding the person who's highly competitive. There's time to use it, especially when there's a shared understanding of competition. But people will start to avoid, and if you're really competitive, people will stop giving you information and stop sharing with you because they don't trust your motives. So you really want to balance it. There is a time to compete, and there's a time not to compete. As with all the styles, there's a time to use them and a time not to. And as you get familiar, you will learn when to do that. But it's a great insight into yourself. Now, online, you can find survey instruments that you can respond to find out what is your most typical conflict style. Like I can tell you, mine was not collaborating. Mine was accommodating. And once I learned that, I had to learn when do I compete? Like, when's that okay? When do I collaborate? When do I compromise? I had to learn all those things because my natural style was to accommodate. So there's learning for all of us. Now, one of the things that ways to look at it in an actual situation. So let's say there's a dispute between two graduate teaching assistants who need to schedule office hours, but both want the same popular time slot. Like they want to have their office hours at the same time, but that really needs to just be one of them so that they have more office hours total. So the competing person would say the graduate teaching assistant who's competitive, and that's their primary style in this situation, will refuse to adjust or consider alternatives. They'll say, oh, I have seniority, I've been here an extra semester, so that means I get it because I have more authority. Or they might say, I claimed it first, so I get it. And that person, the competing person, ignores attempts to find a mutual solution and simply announce their office hours to students without resolving the conflict. So it's a competitive thing is how can I win, get my way, and it disregards the other person's perspective. So in the office hours example, the 1G graduate teaching assistant is like, well, I need mine because I'm better. I have more seniority, and I'm just going to tell the students, I'm not going to consult with you before I do it. A collaborative one would be to look at the times and say, maybe you can do it one week and I can do another, and we can rotate that way. Now, another situation is where two graduate teaching assistants want to deliver a guest lecture in one of the classes, and it's a high-profile guest lecture where, you're like, finally, I get to teach undergraduates about this. Or it might be a lecture to the department. and you're doing it because the faculty member's absent at a conference and you're taking over the class. So the competition comes in with who gets to deliver it. Only one of you can do it. Who gets to do it? So the competitive graduate teaching assistant might email the faculty member directly, pitching themselves and saying, I'm better than the other, I'm a better fit, it's my turn, I should be able to do it. They can do it some other time without regard to the other graduate teaching assistants' interests or responsibilities or situation. They highlight their credentials and assert that because they're better or more of a subject matter expert, they should be the one to give the lecture. And that's the competitive mindset. It doesn't take into account the other. So it's uncooperative, but it's very assertive. So that's another example. So each of these leadership kinds, each of these scenarios, each of these styles has a place to use it and a place not to. What I'm working with you all to do is move out of the unconscious use of maybe one or two styles that's you're most used to into your awareness of all five so that you have more choices, so you can do better in conflict situations because you have more choices on what to do. Now, in the next section, we'll work through some scenarios. As I mentioned, the next part is about applying the styles into situations. So I want you to think of the styles. We've got avoiding, accommodating, compromise, collaboration, and competing. Those are the 5 styles. And in this next section, we will be doing scenarios that you can apply them to.